Okay, so sorry about all of this hassle and what happened yesterday. I left the questions for the sub right next to the computer, so I'm not exactly sure what happened with that. But anyway, quick update. So yesterday my kid's been sick a little bit since last Friday. He's been on antibiotics since last Friday, and then 2 nights ago, I was up with him a lot of the night. He was just sick and crying and just having a hard time. So yesterday I was planning to just stay home with him anyway, and I got up and came in early to North to get everything set up and record my video for Advanced. And then as I was doing that, I got a call from my wife that she took them to the emergency room because he wasn't breathing very well. And when they got there, they said measured his blood oxygen level at about 82%. And I don't know exactly what that means, but the nurse thought the machine was broken, and she did it again. And then when it came back, that's really what it was. It was kind of like this big team whoosh came and took him away. Got him on oxygen, gave him several nebulizers. Any of you have asthma, that type of thing, you're familiar with that. Took him in an ambulance to Children's Hospital because they wanted to keep the oxygen on him and keep the IV in his arm. And he's been there since. We stayed there last night, and then I came home this morning and took a quick shower, and I've been getting stuff ready for you guys. So anyway, he's doing a little bit better. He was without oxygen for a little while last night, but I still think they're kind of keeping it on him. So I'm not here today, obviously, and I'm not sure if I will be at conferences tonight. It kind of depends on what happens with him. So anyway, I apologize for that. I'm going to talk you through the questions for Station 3. I don't have my copy of the book here. I've got a PDF version online, so the page numbers might not be exact, and I might not be giving you specific exact quotes, but I can give you the page number where these things are to be found anyway. So first one, on page 112, why does it matter? So if you want to just write down 112 and kind of write down generally what it's about. Kurtz is described as a voice, and why is this his most distinguishing feature? On 112, it describes him several ways, and physically he's very weak. Kurtz in German means short, and he was very tall and very skinny. You could see his ribs, and he was emaciated. He wasn't doing very well, right? But he, like Marlowe, are at times also described as a voice. Marlowe's described as a voice when he's sitting on the steamer and telling his story in the dark. And with Kurtz, the important thing is his ability to talk, right? His ability to sell people on his ideas and what he at least wants them to think he's trying to do, right? So when we have that pamphlet for the suppression of savage activities or whatever, as primitive peoples or something, we don't really know what Kurtz was like before he came, but I think we can use that as information that maybe he thought he was doing the right thing, and had high intentions when he came over, and through the process of either exploiting people or whatever process you think he underwent to make that change happen in him, to become cruel and vicious and just about money and killing people. Whatever you think that caused it, that's really the key. And so when it talks about him being a voice, it's because he can talk, and can talk really, really well and sell people on it. The effects of that type of speech, the type of speech that Kurtz gives, is kind of what made the aunt think what she does, and what made the intended think what she does. I mean, if Kurtz can talk that well about the company, he must have been a pretty smooth talker with the ladies, I would assume, which isn't really in the book. I'm kind of making that up, but if he's that good with words, that certainly doesn't hurt. So him being described as a voice on page 112. Next question, compare African Queen to the intended. Find descriptions of the Queen first, and then the later questions about the intended. Find some quotes about her. So I'd say on page somewhere around 114, it's on 101 in my PDF version, and I think it's about 13 pages off. This is the first time she shows up. It says, she walked with measured steps, draped in striped and fringed cloths, treading the earth proudly, with a straight jingle and flash of barbarous ornaments. So when we talked about the gender roles within the play, right, that kind of binary opposition of civilized savages, it applies to women. Even just looking at some of the descriptions that he gives of her, in comparison to the intended and the aunt, who seemed to be fairly ignorant, lacking in power, and just kind of oblivious to what's really going on. Treading the earth proudly, which would be something the aunt and intended wouldn't do. And walking proudly with barbarous ornaments, right? Ornaments of barbarous behavior and acting in a barbarian type of way. She carried her head high. Her hair was done to the shape of a helmet. She had brass leggings to her knees. She must have had the value of several elephant tusks upon her. She was savage and superb, wild-eyed and magnificent. There was something ominous and stately in her deliberate progress. Even terms like ominous and stately. Stately would be a term you would use to describe a queen or some type of royalty, how they walk and how they carry themselves, right? But ominous certainly isn't something you would necessarily use to describe a queen. I wouldn't think so anyway. And it seems from onto the next page, when she came abreast the steamer, stood still and faced us, her long shadow fell to the water's edge. Her face had a tragic and fierce aspect of wild sorrow and dumb pain mingled with the fear of some struggling, half-shaped resolve. It's like he's almost giving her credit for having these big thoughts and feelings and emotions, but not quite, right? Like struggling, half-shaped resolve. She's got these ideas and things she wants to do, but because he thinks so little of her, and this is just straight up racist, he's saying things like half-shaped. She can't even come up with her big ideas on her own and the things she wants to do. In terms of quotes about the intended, I would just look in the last 10, 15 pages of the book. There's lots of descriptions. And if you were going to write about her and then bringing in some of the light, dark stuff going on in that scene, the idea of darkness being like what, was in Kurtz's heart and what they were doing, and she's surrounded by this darkness, right? It kind of compares her to that image of the woman holding the torch and carrying the fire through the jungle, right? Surrounded by darkness and just the light face. It's kind of the same way with her. So if you're writing about those three, I mean, you're looking for the descriptions of the aunt near the beginning. You're looking for the descriptions of the queen right around the beginning of part 3 of the text, and then in descriptions of the intended right near the end of the play. Next question, on page 123 to 124, what is Marlowe saying about Kurtz and what's going on in the scene? This is the scene where Marlowe is coming upon Kurtz and finding Kurtz crawling on all fours through the jungle. I came upon him, and if I had not heard me coming, I would have fallen over him too, but he got up just in time. He rose unsteady, long, pale, indistinct, like a vapor exhaled by the earth, swayed slightly, misty and silent before me, while at the back of the fires loomed. Going on, we were within 30 yards from the nearest fire. A black figure stood up, strode on long black legs, waving long black arms across the glow. And remember, Shebe had some fun with that, talking about how ridiculous it is to keep mentioning each body part looking the same. It had horns, antelope horns, I think, on its head. Some sorcerer, some witch man, no doubt, but it looked fiend-like enough. Fiend-like enough can be applied to devil, right? And so it's almost like he's running off in the jungle in the middle of the night, to this devil ceremony, satanic type ceremony. I don't know who exactly it is, but the fact that Mr. Kurtz, who seems to have the respect of lots of the people who live around there, has to bow down and crawl before this person, creature, thing, indicates that this, whoever he's bowing down before, clearly is quite a powerful creature. And I think noting that he looks fiend-like is kind of linking that person to the devil. Marlowe asked him, "Do you know what you're doing?" I whispered. "Perfectly," he answered. Raising his voice for that single word, it sounded to me far off and yet loud, like a hail through a speaking trumpet. Now, going on, Kurt says, "I had immense plans, yes, but if you try to smile..." Going on. Marlowe doesn't want to... I mean, he thinks about killing Kurtz right there, but I think his only real fear, and whether that's putting Kurtz out of his misery, changing the reputation of the company, or just he was appalled by what Kurtz was doing, I'm not sure. But he did that. He didn't do it because he was afraid that Kurtz was going to scream, right? And if Kurtz screamed while he was doing that, then whoever Kurtz is calling towards may come over there and take care of things for him. Going on a little bit, on 113, or page 126 in your book, it says, "Look at the reaction of the villagers when Kurtz is leaving. What are they indicating? When Marlowe says, 'Do you understand this?' Look at Kurtz's reaction and explain what he means by that." So on to 113. What he's talking about is as Kurtz is getting ready to leave, because remember, the word on the street is that the African people didn't want Kurtz to leave, right? And Kurtz ordered the attack, remember, on the steamer when they were on that white fog and couldn't see anything, as a means to just try to get them to turn around and go back. I don't think Kurtz wanted to leave, and I think the villagers did not want Kurtz to leave. And it said, "When we came abreast again, they faced the river. We had carried Kurtz into the pilot house." And again, this is on 126. "We carried Kurtz into the pilot house. There was more air there. Lying on the couch, he stared through the open shutter. There was an eddy in the mass of human bodies. A woman with helmeted head and tawny cheeks rushed out into the very brink of the stream. She put out her hand, shouted something, and all the wild mob took up the shout in roaring chorus of articulated, rapid, breathless utterance. Even those terms are pretty offensive, but do you understand this? I asked. He kept looking past me with fiery, longing eyes, with a mingled expression of wistfulness and hate. He made no answer, but I saw a smile of indefinable meaning, appear on the colorless lips that a moment after twitched convulsively. Do I not? Now, this is one of those things like the horror, which, in the beginning I talked about Marlowe's inconclusive stories, inconclusive experiences that he tells a story about. This is about as inconclusive as you can get. The fact that he smiled, had an expression of fiery, longing eyes mingled with wistfulness and hate. So wistfulness is like a gentle longing, mingled with hate, mingled with fiery, longing eyes. She doesn't want him to leave. We don't know exactly what this is, whether they had some type of relationship, some type of affair, whether they were a couple. I don't know. But him giving that kind of creepy response is about as ambiguous a scene. I mean, it's really ambiguous what exactly we're supposed to take from this, which is why it both makes it a good thing to read and study and not such a good thing to read and study. Is you can, so many of these instances like this, you can just read several different ways. And especially putting all those contradictory descriptors with each other, like wistfulness and hate and longing, and it's a bunch of different weird expressions on his face all at the same time. Going on a little bit to next question is, what do you think the horror means? And that is another page or two down. It's on 116 in here, so I would say 127 or no 128, 129. And this is right as he's about to die. And it says, anything approaching the change that came over his features I have not seen before and never hope to see again. Oh, I wasn't touched. I was fascinated. It was though a veil had been rent. I saw on the ivory face, the expression of somber pride, ruthless power, craven terror of an intense and hopeless despair. Again, pride, power, terror, despair. You can kind of take your pick of almost any of those to describe Kurtz, right? He definitely was ruthless. He had a lot of power. He was a prideful person. Craven terror, I'm not sure whether that's terror of his surroundings, terror of who he's become, terror of the dude with the horns, I'm not sure. Did he live his life again in every detail of desire, temptation, and surrender during the supreme moment of complete knowledge? He cried out in a whisper at some image, at some vision. He called out twice in a cry that was no more than a breath. The horror, the horror. I blew out the candle and left the cabin. Right? So we're bringing light to the darkness, and when he dies, we blow out the candle. Now, you could read that a bunch of different ways, as we've talked about, and if you're going to write about the text as a pro-colonial text, or at least implicitly not being against it, you could say that the horror that he has to go home, or that not that he's ashamed of what he has done, but that people are going to find out and ruin his reputation. He gave Marlowe all those papers that he wrote and the bundle of stuff and all his work and everything he did. The horror could be he feels immense guilt for what he did. My dog's barking. Come here, Jost. Immense guilt for what he's done. Come on up. Immense guilt. This is my dog, Josie. She is a bloodthirsty Schnauzer poodle. Anyway, could be horror that he has to go back. It could be horror that he doesn't get to continue what he's doing. It could be horror that the intended's going to find out. I mean, take your pick. You could do any number of different ones. But, that would probably be a scene you would figure into either an anti-colonial or pro-colonial paper. Couple more things. Sorry, going on to the next page, and I'm not sure exactly what page this is. In yours, I would say it's 104, 103. This is right after he died, and he had summed up, he had judged the horror. He was a remarkable man. After all, this was the expression of some sort of belief. It had a candor, it had conviction, had a vibrating note of revolt in its whisper. It had the appalling face of a glimpsed truth, a strange commingling of desire and hate. Again, it's these contradictory words all put together, which makes this really ambiguous. It said, true, he had made that last stride, he had stepped over the edge into insanity. While I had been permitted to draw back my hesitating foot, I think seeing him going towards the horns guy might have made him pull his foot back. And perhaps in this is the whole difference. Perhaps all the wisdom, all the truth, all the sincerity are just compressed into that inappreciable moment. of time in which we stepped over the threshold of the invisible. Yikes, that's a heavy sentence. Basically what he's saying is maybe everything that's important, all the wisdom, all the truth, everything we get in that last moment before we pass away. That's a lot. I like to think of a summing up would have been a better word of careless contempt. Better his cry. Going on, there's a really good quote that I don't have here. I'm going to have to find it and bring it in because it's the most wonderfully depressing comment on life ever. Going on, a couple more things. Marlowe's return to Europe. Hang on one sec. Okay, 133, 134. When Marlowe returns back to Europe, and this is one of those things that you could use if you're writing about why it's against colonialism, but he doesn't tell anyone he gets back. It said, I found myself back in the sepulchral city, resenting the sight of people hurrying through the streets to filch a little money from each other, to devour their infamous cookery, to gulp their unwholesome beer, to dram their insignificant and silly dreams. They trespassed in my thoughts. They were intruders whose knowledge of life was, to me, an irritating pretense. An irritating pretense because they just don't get it. Right? The people never left, they've never gone anywhere else, they haven't had any experiences, and they have these visions of what's taking place with the company and groups like that. But he's really irritated by them because it's like he went off on this, I'm trying to think of a good example of this. If you remember Their Eyes Watching God, you probably don't, but if you do, when Janie left, right away in the beginning of the book, which is the end of the book, she comes back into town and the town's giving her all kinds of crap and saying all these rude things about her, and she just doesn't care. And she says at the end of the book to her friend Phoebe, you got to go there to know there, right? And you have to go experience life. And so he felt like Janie wasn't resentful of the people who didn't go anywhere and didn't have any experiences, but Marlowe really is, right? He said they just can't understand. Their bearing, which was simply the business of commonplace individuals going about their business in the assurance of perfect safety, was offensive to me like the outrageous flauntings of folly in the face of a danger it was unable to comprehend. I have no particular desire to enlighten them, but I had some difficulty in restraining myself from laughing in their faces so full of stupid importance. And that stupid importance would be what Europe is doing, right? Looking at the types of things that the aunt says. Going on, a couple more things. Unexplored regions, sorry. This is when he talks to, hang on one sec. I think this is about on page 113, 114, 112, 110. It's right near the end. And this is when Marlowe is talking to the guy who he gives this suppression of savage customs to. He tears off the postscript where it says, just kill other Bruce. And this guy's talking about Kurtz, and this might be another good quote for you about Kurtz and talking. It said, and it become expensive, confessed his opinion that Kurtz really couldn't write a bit, but heavens, how that man could talk. He electrified large meetings. He had faith, don't you see? He had faith, and he had faith. He had the faith. He could get them to believe anything. Anything. He would have been a splendid leader of an extreme party. What party? I asked. Any party, he said. He was an extremist. Did I think so? I assented. I said, did I know, he asked, with a sudden flash of curiosity, what it was that induced him to go out there? Yes, said I, and forthwith handed him the famous report for publication if he thought fit. He glanced through it hurriedly, mumbling all the time, judged that it would do, and took it upon himself. Going on, lastly, sorry, hang on one sec. Now, sorry, there was one other thing, but I can't find it. In the last conversation with the intended, so I would jump to the last 10, 15 pages, and said that dusk was falling, and so in this scene there's all kinds of light and dark you might want to pay attention to. She came forward all in black with a pale head floating toward me in the dusk. She was in mourning. She was more than a year since his death, more than a year since the news came. She seemed as though she would remember and mourn forever. I heard you were coming, she said, and this is a good quote about women in here. I noticed she was not very young, not girlish. She had a mature capacity for fidelity, for belief, for suffering. Mature capacity. So this isn't just like a childish person who hasn't experienced the world. She's an adult, but she has a mature capacity for fidelity, for belief, and for suffering. Going on. And she keeps trying to answer questions for him. I don't know if you picked up on this, but she asks him questions and then kind of answers them for him. Like when he said he was a remarkable man, I said unsteadily. Again, he brings up remarkable a number of times. Remarkable could be wonderful, could be terrible, could be just something that you want to note. And he wrote, "It was impossible not to love him," she finished eagerly. How true, how true. But when you think of that no one knew him as well as I had all the noble confidence. I knew him best. Going on, and he does lie to her at the end, and it said, his end, I said, was in every way worthy of his life. She's trying to get him to tell what happened when he died. Marla doesn't really want to tell. I was not with him, she murmured. My anger subsided into a feeling of infinite pity. Everything that could have been done, I mumbled. Ah, but I believed in him more than anyone on earth, more than his own mother, more than himself. He needed me. I would have treasured every sigh, every word, every glance. I felt a chill grip my chest. Don't, I said in a muffled voice. Forgive me. I've mourned so long in silence. You were there to his last. I think his loneliness. Nobody near him to understand him as I would have understood. Perhaps no one to hear, because he's only a voice. To the very end, I heard his very last words. I stopped in fright. Now, he just can't do it. Right? And remember, he talked about in the beginning, there was the setup about how much he hated lies, and he feels like lies have a taint of mortality in them, and it's like biting into rotten meat. But in the end, he does, because he just can't break that world for her. It said, I heard a light sigh, and then my heart stood still, stopped dead short by exulting and terrible cry, by the cry of inconceivable triumph and unspeakable pain. I knew it, I was sure. She knew, she was sure. I heard that weeping. She'd hidden her hands in her face. And it seemed to me that the house would collapse before I could escape, that the heavens would fall upon my head because he straight up lied. But nothing happened. Heavens do not fall for such a trifle. Why would they have fallen, I wonder? Would they have fallen, I wonder, if I'd rendered Kurtz that justice which was his due? Now, justice, I don't know whether it's justice to her, justice to the society, or just to have to pay for what he did. But I could not tell her. It would have been too dark altogether. So, again, sorry for the last 2 days.